Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Course Pro. This is the office hour for the spring and summer course. This is number 2 on April 18th, 2022. Great to see everybody here. Nice to see you all. So nice to see people's faces. We're going to be going through the questions that folks have put out today. We've got some great questions today. Excited to go through them. The earlier you put those questions in, the more time I have to think about them and the more time I have to give you a more complete answer. So just a nice invitation to do more of that if and when you can. If we have time, there's lots of questions today. So if we have time, we'll go into the next assignment and we'll talk about things that are coming up. But yeah, good to see everybody. All right. So we'll start with Dave. Let's just pull this up. So David, regarding peer review, see there was a discrepancy between lesson 1 peer review instructions and the course syllabus. Do we pick 2 students and comment on the work, or are we assigned? Nope, just pick them. So find 2 students every week, look through the materials and comment on what you see or what you find, help guide them if you feel like they might have missed something. What else can I say about that? Yeah, I would say you could choose 2 and walk through the entire course with them, or you could switch. I think there's definitely value in just working with 2 because you get a chance to see the whole assignment build. And it's probably the most useful for folks, but it's totally up to you. If you decide to comment on everybody's work, 1, it would take a lot of time. 2, you'd learn exponentially being exposed to your classmates' work. And you'd probably win a prize. I don't know what prize it would be because I don't have one, but it would be the person who did the most amount of peer review nonstop. So does that answer your question, Daniel or David? Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, so Daniel Hash from Kellogg, Idaho had a question related to the 3 permaculture ethics. Third ethic seems to be different with different PDC courses. Yes, indeed it is. Originally, Bill Mollison's 3rd ethic seemed to have been set limits to population consumption. I've also heard it described by Jeff Lawton as return of surplus. I've also heard it called as future care. In this course lessons, it's referred to as fair share. I have interpreted it as a non-political ethic determined by the property steward to ensure that the excess yield from the property is not wasted but utilizes so it benefits the first 2 ethics. My definition, this could be composting the material, earth care, marketing or giving away the surplus, people care, or sharing the yield of the ecosystems with the wildlife, earth care. I feel above all, every decision we make in developing and implementing the permaculture design must be measured against the 3 ethics. Can you discuss this in the next forum and let me know if I'm misinterpreting the 3rd ethic? Daniel, you've asked a question of intense proportions, and I'm very excited that you did. So there's a couple of pieces here. Especially when you start interacting with the permaculture, the international permaculture community, you will find that 3rd ethic is probably the thing that changes the most. I've heard those, and I've heard other versions of it. It seems to be the one that's most malleable because it's the one that has the most controversy attached to it. We have to kind of take a step back first, though, and we have to think about the movement in general. So Bill designed the movement along with David, and then they took 2 very different paths. One was David wanted to go and practice and really get a sense of where and how this work all came to being and bearing and prove a lot of what they had written down. And Bill was an evangelist, and so he walked the world. He spoke to people from all different ilks and wanted to spread the good word, so to speak. But in both situations, it was grassroots. So that means that there is no unifying body over top of permaculture. There's been multiple attempts. Bill had an attempt years ago with the Tagari Teaching College. And then I don't remember when, but I think it was in the 90s, he sent out a letter. I tried to find it before I got online, but I couldn't find it. That basically said, I'm not gonna police people, because folks were submitting in their teacher certificates and Bill was giving it to them, and other people were saying they didn't do the work. And Bill realized what happens when you try to police people, and he just took a big step back. Since then, there's been a lot of efforts, notably Jeff Lawton with the Permaculture Research Institute, which was gifted to him by Bill. has tried to create a certification program. And largely it's been to direct the overburden of work that comes to Jeff to go to different instructors, and then the overburden of some of his more prime instructors. There was efforts within what's called permaculture institutes, and those are headed by individuals who were either taught by Bill or had connection to him, but didn't want to be underneath the PRI, Permaculture Research Institute structure. And then there's outlier organizations. One of them is the Permaculture Institute of North America, or PINA. Also, they don't like being called PINA, shockingly. And with PINA, they've done a really good job of regulating and trying to be at a high level of rigor, going with the original different diplomas that you could get out of Tagari and then other institutes. And they've tried to make it a bit more rigorous. That said, it's still a grassroots movement. So you get a diploma from PINA and you go to another place and they may or may not have any recognition of it. And truthfully, there's no international recognition of a permaculture design certificate anyways. So you may find that there's landscape design organizations or development organizations that say that they would like to see if you've had a PDC. But if you had a PDC from, some of the more disreputable online kind of fly-by-night permaculture courses, or if you had one from OSU, they're not really checking. I say all of that to say that it's a bit of a Wild West situation. There is no one that's saying exactly what it is, and you will find variation within that third ethic. But my approach to it is to use Bill's original one, which is to set limits to population and consumption. And then the second part of that, which is really important, is that by governing our own needs, we can set resources aside to further the above principles. And what I've taken that to mean is that with the surplus you have, because you're not over consuming, you can take that overconsumption surplus and you can move it back into people care and back into earth care. And I think for me, this is the most directed ethic. And it's the ethic that I think has had the most influence on me in tandem with the prime directive. So the prime directive is the only ethical decision is to take responsibility of our own existence and of that of our children. Make it now. And make it now is bolded in all of the text that Bill wrote. What did he mean by that? What was he talking about? Some of the online PDCs that you can see of Bill and Jeff, the one I'm thinking of is free that you can find on YouTube. He goes into this in depth, and he really speaks about the fact that one of the major issues we have internationally and globally at this time is that we have decided that we will externalize and we will outsource all of our needs. Our power is produced somewhere else. Our fuel is produced somewhere else. Our food is produced somewhere else. And to a large extent, if not uniformly, that is what has created the issues that we exist in today. If we continue to work on small scale agriculture, if we continue to source locally as much as possible, I'm not saying that in this day and age we wouldn't reach out globally for elements. There's always been international trade. But if we focused on that local aspect, if we strengthen the community that we have locally, if we traded with our neighbors for the things we needed, if each of us built surplus in an element of work, food, handicraft, value-added products that we ourselves love to create and come from a place of essence. I love making tincture. I make spilanthes, St. John's wort, mullein, and kava kava tincture. It's something that I do in excess. It's something I love to do, and I trade and I sell it. Do any of my neighbors do that? No. Is that offer for trade and sale to them? Yeah. Is that me taking care of my own needs in terms of my own health? 100%. Does it also produce income locally on this land? Absolutely. The alcohol comes from less than a couple hours away, 6 distilled barley. The St. John's wort is here. I grow my spilanthes. The mullein is here. The only thing I purchase is kava. So, all of that is me taking care of more and more of my own responsibilities. And a longtime mentor and now colleague and really good friend, Brandon Bauer, who was one of the original teachers of the PDC I took in 2009, said it to me best years ago when he was building his off-grid passive solar house. He's like, now I've got my housing taken care of and I've got my heating because it's passive solar. And this is amazing. So he's got an outdoor thermometer, and he hit a 68 and 71 during the heat dome last year on Salt Spring Island, which is a coastal maritime climate, and he grows avocados, and there was 3 other tropical trees he was growing in this little microclimate. But every single time I see him, he's working on that next thing that he's growing. He's working on taking care of his water next, then his power is next. And at this point, he's taking care of all of his needs, save fuel. And he's constantly talking about, how is he going to take care of his fuel needs? So what does this mean? Is this if you don't do this, you're not practicing permaculture? No. This is the great thing about a grassroots movement and self-directed, right? Inherent in that prime directive is how much you want to take on. If you want to take on more of your responsibilities, great. If you don't, great. There's nobody there that has a finger to wave at you. And those that would wave their finger at you, you best ignore. I've been to many permaculture convergences. The International Permaculture Convergence is an incredible thing to visit if you ever get a chance. And there's always going to be a person who goes, you don't poop in a bucket, or you don't compost your manure, your human manure. How can you call yourself a permaculturalist? There's always going to be people who want to design your life for you and tell you what to do. All I can say is smile and wave at those people and walk on, because there's always going to be somebody, and especially within our modern life, we're trained to judge everybody around us and to keep up with the Joneses, at least from a corporate consumer capitalistic culture. It's ingrained into us. It makes us good consumers. The great thing is that once you dive deeply into permaculture and you realize that you'd rather become a producer, you become further immune by those societal biases. You're no longer interested in always keeping up with everyone else. And hopefully over time, you lose a bit of that judgmental nature that is so ingrained into our society and at detriment. There's nothing good about that conversation whatsoever. So for me, he put into, in a few words, what I think is probably the most comprehensive way to live on the planet with the prime directive and the original 3 ethics. If you decide to work with fair share, if you decide to work with future care, great. I'm not here to judge you. I don't really care. Find the ethics that work for you, that put you into a place of action, that puts you into a place of taking care of your own needs, that puts you into a place of production, that makes you realize that we all have an effect on this planet, and hopefully put you into a mindset that you want to do better. Don't get into the guilt of the carbon footprint that was a BP marketing ploy, which is finally coming to surface again. This idea that we could reduce all of our climate issues to one single metric. There are so many metrics when it comes to ecological disruption. So I would say treat yourself kindly, do as much as you can, and work forward from there. I don't know if Daniel's actually on this. I don't think I see him here.
Yeah, he's my dad actually, but he might be coming in a little bit late, but he was planning on catching the recording either way.
Okay, thanks, Ty. Appreciate it. Also, super cool you guys are taking this together. I love that. And I think we talked enough about the prime directive. Did I say anything? Yeah, I said all of this. Cool. I could wax poetically on that for hours. So I think I'll pause there unless anybody has any follow-up questions to that. Okay. If people are taking sips of drink from their NASA mugs, then I think we're good. Janice. Okay, here we go. I have a property that's 5 distinct, if not so distinct elevations in the landscape. I estimate with confidence that in total, it's less than 20 feet in elevation difference. The assignment requires us to include contour lines. Usually they are in 20-foot increments. No map I found, satellite or otherwise, has this for my property. It was probably shaped by the builder 42 years ago. Am I required for this assignment? Am I required for this assignment? I want to, of course, over the course, to either pay for a survey or spend what I believe will be literally days to map this out myself using string and level to complete. I ask because I don't think I can physically do it. The land's extremely divergent across the surface. Obviously, I would want to have smaller increments. I just want to make sure I have complete the assignments for full points. I think I must do it for a project overall. Yeah, great question. So in the tutorial, I say if you have contours, great. If you don't, just use water flow lines. So if you can generally look across the landscape and go water flows this way and this way and this way and this way and this way, fantastic. You don't have to go overboard with it. If there's micro undulations that you want to showcase, that's great. When we get into contours, which are uniform elevational lines that are done at interval to show us from a plan view what generally the topography looks like, they're exceptionally useful. And for me, if I'm working on anything that's large scale, I require it. I won't do a design without topographical mapping. Note that when you're working in your portfolio, blue is exclusively for water. I don't want to see any blue zones, any blue microclimates. Microclimates is the one thing I'm a little lenient on, but no blue zones. I don't want to see blue arrows that are pointing to things. Blue water flow lines, great. Blue areas that water is stagnating, fantastic. Blue spigots, stupendous. If it has to do with water and it's blue, great. But don't use blue for anything else. Also, green is exclusively for vegetation. Don't use green for zones. Don't use green for microclimates. Don't do any of that. Just keep those there. I'm not saying any of you are doing that. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that that's what I'd like to see. So if you don't have contours readily available, use water flow lines. If you're looking for a more systematic way to go about finding contours or finding topographical information, which you can then extrapolate contours, a couple pieces of information. I've talked about this before, but in 2000, NASA launched a shuttle radar and topographic mission. And basically, they sent the shuttle around the planet with LIDAR, light image detection, and radar. And basically, they shot a laser down at the planet, and its response back through vegetation, even and through water, told them what the depth of the planet was relative to the shuttle in orbit. And so they were able to map the planet. This data is the base data for all of Google's information. So that means Google Earth Pro, Google Maps, and almost exclusively all of the contour map generators you can find online all came from this information. When they shot it, a pixel, so a pixel size was 30 meters. That means if you had any Z or elevational difference that was less than 30 meters, the computer did the scientific work of interpolating, also called guessing, what those different structures look like. And so we ended up with largely 20 foot and sometimes 20 meter contour lines around the planet. Now, sometimes there's localized information and folks will say, yeah, so we've upgraded this information and it's down to 5 feet or 3 feet or 2 meters or 1 meter. What's interesting is in a number of these contour map generators, you dive into the information and you find it's rehashed information from the SRTM model. So yes, you can take contours off of Google Maps through a Google SketchUp tutorial. If you look up contour lines from Google SketchUp, it'll show you how to slice an elevation and then take that information and put it back into Google Earth. However, that information is only as good as that shuttle radar topographic mission. And a colleague put together an amazing article and paper saying that the Z axis, the up and down axis, can be up to 15 meters in error, and the X and Y can be up to 5. So largely, I will use that information for general water flow and for general information. That said, I had a client of mine, Curtis Stone, who got information off Contour Map Generator, knew it was wrong, hired me to do a survey, and they were literally perpendicular to each other. What came from Contour Map Generator, which he had to pay for, was perpendicular to what I provided when I went in and did a combined survey, which I'll explain at the end of this conversation. So food for thought there. Just know that that's the level of detail you're getting from that conversation. And generally, if you're just looking for water flow and it's over a large area, it'll be fine. Local municipal GIS resources. So first thing I do if I'm doing any work is I will look up the local municipality. So if it's a town, a city, whatever. If the town doesn't bring anything up, I'll move to the region or the county. If the county doesn't bring anything up, I'll move to the region, move to the province or state. See if I can find anything from municipal, from governmental resources. Every once in a while, I find information, or I will reach out directly and contact the GIS individual who works at that municipality. That's been my highest success rate. Hey, how's it going? I'm working on this project where I'm trying to catch more water, build more habitat, um, create more resiliency. Do you by any chance have a digital elevation model, which is what you're looking for, digital elevation model, a DEM? Do you have a digital elevation model or topographic information for this site? Normally, you have to find whatever indicator your municipality uses for that site. Up in Canada, it's called a PID, a parcel indicator number. Sometimes it's a lot number. You'll have to find what that is because they'll need that to plug into their system. So understand what that is for your region before you go into it. And then say, this is the number, give them everything they need, and then send it off to them, see if they have that. The other resource that I've been using quite a bit is natural resource companies and organizations. So community woodlots, as of recent, has been amazingly successful. I found a community woodlot that somehow has access to LiDAR information of my entire area down to 10 centimeter accuracy. So that's been phenomenal. So I would highly recommend reaching out and researching community woodlots in your area. They tend to have accessed forestry information, and have used that because they're working for the community good or the community betterment. The others are mining and forestry. So sometimes you'll find the local mills, local forestry companies, or local mines may have information. They're harder to get information out of only because they don't have a department set up to export and give it to you or have you pay for it. So that could be a bit of a workaround. Play on the value of your project. That could be a help. Water conservation organizations sometimes have very accurate LiDAR or topographic mapping of your region or area, and reaching out to them has proven successful in a few situations. Similarly, conservation organizations have been really successful. Sometimes you'll find the invasive species folks have great maps. And then finally, environmental services companies. So folks that are doing environmental assessment, Golder and Associates is big up in Canada. So I've reached out to them before. So these are the folks that I'll go through before I go ahead and I start to work on a survey. If I do have to conduct a survey, there's a few easy, simple ways that I found to do it, which are cheaper than contracting a $10,000 or $12,000 survey. The first way is if it is an open canopy. This means if there are no trees or a few trees on the property, you can work with a third party drone application. The one that I've used many times is called Maps Made Easy. It's the cheaper of the two, and it's the less accurate of the two, and it has less features. And the other one is Drone Deploy. Both of these are third-party applications that commonly, and I don't know if they work with any other drones because I've only ever used the DJI drones. And I've used a Phantom 4 and I've used a Mavic 1 are the two drones I've used to do mapping. And basically what you do is you run this drone through these programs over your property that you're looking to create a digital elevation model of. And what they do is they extrapolate out the elements, they extrapolate out the distance between the drone, because the drone has a fixed position in the sky, which it knows, and it has a fixed position where it took off from. And what it does is through the process of photogrammetry, it takes two photos, and through trigonometry and seeing the change of angle and seeing how far it's gone from point to point, it creates a highly accurate map down to 10 or 15 centimeters. And this is largely how most of the maps were created in Western North America during exploration and colonization. Then it will export a DEM, digital elevation model, and then you can, through either your own efforts in programs like QGIS, which is free, or ArcGIS, which is paid, you can then extrapolate contours, you can do elevational data. There's an amazing QGIS training for those that like making maps through the regrarians.org, which I highly recommend. Georgi Pavlov is an incredible mapper and has done exceptional work there. Or you can send it to an expert. So you can look up folks on Fiverr or Upwork. I have a few folks that I work with, and I'm happy to share their contact information with you folks. One is Paper Street Permaculture, Brent Smith, who's been my go-to for mapping needs for close to 10 years. And I'm just evaluating somebody else. So we'll see if they pan out. And then they can produce all of these exports for you. They can produce the contours, the aspects, the slopes, the water distribution, things of that nature. The other thing you can do is you can rent what's called a total station, a ground total station, RTK, real-time kinetic total station, with a receiver. And what that does is that when you set up that real-time kinetic ground station, that real-time kinetic ground station is constantly connecting with a number of different satellite constellations. And it will take its point in time and space down to sub-centimeter accuracy. That means that wherever it is on your property, if you measure it correctly and make sure it's set up properly, its point in time and space will be sub-centimeter. From there, you can take a receiver and you can walk the property, and depending on the amount of tree cover and how long you hold that position, it will come down to usually sub 5 centimeter accuracy, and it'll take a point. And basically, if you're taking a look at undulations, you want to take the top, the mid, and the bottom. So that way you get all of this articulation around your site. I've also used this method combined and put them together and then produced a map for an entire site. And that's how I do it now, because it's relatively cheap. You know, it's somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 as opposed to the $8,000 and $10,000 that a professional survey would take, and it gives me the majority of the information I need. Janice, does that answer question number 1?
Yes, I just hope that I can get a copy of this video so I couldn't write fast enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. So something for everyone. We talked about this in the first one, but if you go to the our course page, so if you go to the discussion page, if you go up to the top, you'll see that the OSU PDC Pro 2022 Spring Summer Office Hours, Javan students, there's the link to the questions. There's the link to the time and date. There's our dates. And then there's the previous office hours. So if you don't see it on my YouTube channel, you can always click there and I repopulate them after every conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Great question, by the way. Second question. In the Excel spreadsheet video tutorial by Neil Bertrando, he shows that he imports a couple of dimensions to the cell on the scale image worksheet, and all the number variables are recalculated immediately. But he skipped over what equation he uses to do this. While I don't know technically how to write equations for Excel, I'm sure I can find a tutorial online, but wanted to inquire while I have the opportunity to know what the equation is. I did just send him an email, and so I'll see what he sends me. But it sounds like it's just a video, and it's not. He didn't link the actual equation. So I'll see what I can find for you, Janice, and I'll put it into this and send you a reply.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries. Awesome, running along. Chandra, do you have any references for permaculture projects which involve heavy machinery, excavators informing their landscapes? Yeah, many. Yeah, Chandra, I don't think you're on the call, so I'm not completely sure, but yeah, let me know a little bit more about what you're after, because there are so many. There's a great book, Earthworks in Permaculture Landscapes, that came out a little while ago. There's a great book that I have called Small Earthen Dams that I think is just has just been remarkable. So yeah, happy to share that one by Katie Nelson. I'm just going to put that here in the resources.
Do you mind posting that book just in the upper part of the page where we had some of the other book resources?
Yeah, for sure.
I love having that where I've just, build my professional reading list kind of thing. Having those is really helpful.
You got her. Katie, what's Katie Nelson? And you can also find this in online. There's quite a bit. Here we go. 18th. Cool. Yeah, so Chandra, let me know if you have some more specifics here, because I can wax poetically on this and technically on this for a very long time. It's a speciality of mine. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts were about that. I want to make some ponds to capture surface water. Any advice on making the base waterproof naturally? Yeah, so there's largely 3 different ways that I go about this process. First and foremost is finding clay veins or finding clay on site. This is done usually by taking a look at what's called inflection points. So when we go into a landscape and we take a look at the keyline design process, when we take a look at the primary valley, which is the only place that a key point exists, when that primary valley goes from convex to concave, that inflection point just after it, if you think of water, water and the raindrops of water are highly percussive. So when they drop down on bare ground, they percuss that soil bed, which is the molecule of soil, and they break apart the sand, silt, and clay plus the organic matter of soil. That means that now that sand, silt, and clay is in solution. And once it's in solution, it's basically flowing over landscape. Once that raindrop erosion turns to sheet erosion, then rills, then runnels, then gully. Once we get to gully, we get an erosive potential that will unzip an entire landscape. It'll basically continually unzip this landscape. So when that overland flow gets into a valley, and as it crests over that convex and gets to that concave, it's the one moment where the inertia of the particulates, sand, silt, and clay that's in that water has a chance to slow down and drop out. So over millennia, these points in landscape, these inflection points just after them called key points, this is where you'll see contour lines close and then contour lines spacing out. And you'll know it because if you walk it, you'll find when you're walking down slope, you're walking on your tippy toes. And then all of a sudden you're onto your soles or onto your heels. That's going to be that inflection point. You can feel it when you walk it. That's going to be the point where that sand, silt, and clay came out. And as you'll find out in the shake jar test, sand levels out first, then silt, then clay. So this is one of the places in the entire landscape where clay will filter out, and could be one of these places where we'll do some exploratory excavator digging and try and find clay. If we find those clay veins, there's a couple ways of going about building our dams. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing now. So first and foremost, we can do what's called a keyway or a key line dam. And what this means is that if we've got our landscape like so, and we found our vein, what we do is when we create our dam, what we'll do is we'll go in, we'll use red as or dark red as our clay, and we'll create a little keyway. And the reason for this is we want to make sure that the dam is locked in. So however deep we make this dam, we want to make sure that the bottom of this dam has this keyway, this sort of impoundment. This is a cross section. So let's say that we build and create a beg or a borrow pit. So we've got our borrow pit here. Remember that ponds always need to be stepped or terraced to make sure that they don't become evaporation ponds or pools. So let's say we go up like so. So now we've got this keyway and probably coming in a little bit closer. That keyway, we're going to actually extend up. So this becomes actually the dam wall. And normally when we're building dams, we want to ensure that we have what's called freeboard. And freeboard is basically, depending on size and scope, it's a meter or 3 feet of area that the water itself will never touch. It's basically area above that water line where the dam has ability to resist any wave action that the pond's creating. And then in terms of overflow, we can do a number of different things. We can do elements like what's called a Sepholzer monk. This is a standpipe drain, so we'll have a back grade here and a front grade here. We can do what's called a Sepholzer monk, which is a standpipe, basically comes in, is friction fitted and can be turned back and forth. So you can lower this volume of water. So it's got a little friction fit elbow, and then you can turn it back and forth. Sep did this to drain ponds, to harvest fish. Did some remarkable work with that. You can also do a swale overflow. So if we look at this in contour or in plan view now, let's say that this is our dam wall, our impoundment wall. We can have a swale that comes off of this on contour that also extends the collection area or zone of this dam. But also we can ensure that our overflow is far away from the pond and is normally on a ridge. So the reason why we usually overflow on a ridge is we don't want to add to any erosive potential. This is what's called a level sill spillway, and it's perfectly dead level to the point to where if water overflows from this, from the swale, from the upside of the swale here, it won't even move a blade of grass. And there's lots of good resources here in the course. So let's say our pond is totally filled and fills so much that it back floods over here, then that water can overflow on that level sill spillway. And the best rule of thumb I found on designing the length of the level sill spillway is it's the square root of the catchment area, which was a little trick I picked up from Jeff Lawton years ago in California. Great little rule of thumb. So whatever the square root of this area is, let's say this catchment area is 9 square meters. This would be 3 meters long. So that's generally what we're looking at in terms of different elements when we get into different types of pond design. This is cool that I can just erase this. We can also do what's called, get rid of this too. Is it the top or the bottom? Oh, it's that one. Cool. We can also do what's called a diaphragm. A diaphragm or a lined. So basically what we do is we'll take the clay and we'll line the pond. So with clay, if we've got 40% clay, this is usually 6 to 12 inches thick or deeper. And if we're using bentonite, bentonite is commonly used in the oil and gas industry and expands 10 times its size when wet and is self-healing. Once you get to a certain thickness, we'll layer on here up to 24 inches, which is a lot of bentonite. I've tried unsuccessfully to line ponds with a little bit of bentonite. And generally you want what's the powdered version. The granular version is not as useful. The other way to do this, which takes a lot more time and takes years, is what's called glaying. And typically we'll do this with animals. So basically we'll put a fence in and we'll pen a bunch of pigs in here, or even ducks. And basically what we're doing is we're feeding them, giving them a bit of water and having them defecate in this area, and their own process of compacting and working this area will create what's called a glaze soil, which we'll see a lot if you get into riparian soil science. There's lots of glaze soils there. And these are the soils that when you stick your boot in and you take your foot out, the boot stays totally stationary. So we can start to build that up. That takes a lot of time. So if you have a lot of time and not a lot of money, but you're willing to work with animals, or if you want to be the animal and put in clay soils, or if you want to put in manures yourself and create an anaerobic condition, you can do it that way. And the last one is what Sepp does successfully and unsuccessfully at times, is he'll bring in an excavator. He'll put a little bit of water into the base. If he can, he'll find some clay, and basically he'll bring that excavator bucket down, and basically he'll vibrate. Not all excavators have this possibility, especially in North America. We have not great excavators, but he'll basically vibrate the bucket and he'll continually compact that soil structure. And he'll go systematically throughout that entire base of the pond, and then moving up and then continually doing that. I've taken on this process anyways, and doing this work regardless of what I'm doing, just to compact the base, and it just makes a more waterproof pond. The other ways to do this is you can use an EPDM liner. And EPDM liner, you'll want to be careful not to get the fire retardant version of that. That will create a off-gassing and contamination of the water that goes into that pond, which is problematic. The other thing you can do is start to create what's called ephemeral ponds. These are ponds that aren't meant to have full-time water holding. And over time, what they do is they do build up water holding capacity. So if you just create indentation or create, dam walls with the material you have, over time, that water will fill up and drain away, fill up and drain away. And within 5 or 6 years, you can actually have full ecosystems there, which I've done pretty successfully in the past as well. Chandra, I would ask if that answered your question, but you're not here. So I'll just ask anybody else, any other questions about that specifically?
I imagine we'll be going more in depth on some of this more later in the course as we get more into the water.
Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely an early question. Yeah. There's lots of good resources about dam building. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Permaculture teaches us to optimize usage of water, soil, earth, and wind. What about fire? Yeah. So glad you asked. I'm no longer the black sheep of permaculture because fire actually has a huge value. And we're finally starting to recognize the indigenous low and slow intensity anthropological fire. So a couple of years ago, I got the opportunity to create a documentary, and my brother's a award-winning cinematographer, and he said, "Hey, why don't we do a film on permaculture?" And the granting season and the production season was during winter, which is not a very photogenic time to talk about permaculture in Canada. So instead, we said, well, why don't we take a look at fire? Why don't we take a look at something that's really alive right now? And so we created this documentary called Facing Fire, Building Resiliency to Wildfire. It's on YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel. It's 22 minutes long. And basically, we explain how we got to our current fire situation and what we can do about it. Because of that, and if you watch it, which I recommend you do only to educate yourself about the current situation, was Elizabeth Azus and Margot Robbins, who created the Cultural Fire Management Council, invited me down to Yurok territory in Northwestern California a couple of years ago before COVID hit. And I got to learn how to burn. So I got to work with these incredible indigenous women and put fire on the landscape. And there is something ancestral to putting fire on the landscape. I know my people in the Ukraine did it quite routinely and specifically. And learning now about the First Nations of North America and internationally have used it for millennia. And fire plays an amazing role in our landscapes. If our landscapes haven't burned and they're in fire ecology, they will burn, and they're meant to burn. A great majority of our landscapes, our fire ecology landscapes, are reproductive through burning. So they have what's called serotinous cones that only open at a certain fire temperature. What's incredible about that conversation is that currently the fuel load of most of our forests move past serotinous cones range and will destroy those cones. Not to mention a regular forest fire will sterilize down 6 inches, sometimes 12 inches. But what we're getting now are these firestorms where the heat is so intense, you can get up to 3, 4, 5 feet of sterilization, which means that the regeneration of that forest is extended to a time period we don't know because we've never experienced this before. What's fascinating about that is our approach to this has to be multifaceted. Part of it has to be starting to take a look at fuel reduction. That means, especially around the house, 15-meter fire break minimum, 30 meters or 30 feet. So 15 meters, 30 feet. This means nothing flammable around the house. This means if you do have wooden structures, that you take a look and you work with creating what's called ember occlusion. One of the main reasons homes burn is not because fire licks them. It's because an ember that's pushed in front of the fire, this ember front, will land on the house and the house itself will burn from a simple ember that gets into a flammable substance. We have very flammable lives. I just had an amazing webinar with Joan Webster, OAM, who literally wrote the book on bushfire resiliency and management for Australia and became the de facto educational source for that material. This book called Essential Bushfire Management is a point form book, which I highly recommend if you live in fire ecology, you purchase. The webinar is on my YouTube channel, and Joan goes into the details of it, but in 1993, there was a major fire in Australia, and 95%, 95% of the people, she just sent me the resource, 90 to 95% of the people who survived because they followed Joan's advice, which was keep a fire break around your house, have a plan, enact that plan, and defend your house. This is something we don't talk about in North America. In North America, it's leave your house. But Joan has successfully advised people to do this. And when they follow her advice, they do quite well. And what's amazing about Joan's conversation is so many people will fight the fire and they'll turn around instead of defend the house. And what you do is you look at the house, right? When you see an ember, you take care of the ember. When you take a look at what's going on. So that's a piece about defense. When it comes to low and slow intensity fire, it is a beautiful thing to put onto a landscape. We're not talking about the slash and burn agriculture we see in the Amazon. What we're talking about is low, slow intensity fire that creates fire breaks and removes ground fuel. Over the last couple of years, after I've learned about this, I've been putting fire back on the landscape with my bonus daughter, because she came with a relationship. I didn't have to do anything. And it's been super fun to do as a family. So we go out and we put a little fire on the landscape, and we manage it with rakes, and we rake along the fire slow and slow. When things get crazy, you stomp out the fire. You check it 24, 48, 72, a full week afterwards. And this was how we found where they had been feeding the cows for years. So we found this plot that we thought was just a really productive place of grass. And what we found was that there was decomposing hay and straw that had been there for years, that had gone down for 4 or 5 feet, because the fire had found its way in there and was smoldering for 6 days. We finally were able to put it out. But all of that is important to know, that low and slow intensity fire is a wonderful tool in the toolbox, but we have to learn how to use it. And so highly recommend folks reach out to the Cultural Fire Management Council if you're keen to learn how to burn. They're one of the most able and resourced individuals to do this. They do at least 2 public burns a year that you can apply to as a total noob. And they take you through the process, which is really, really incredible. So I'd highly recommend learning about that. In terms of other types of fire, we talk a lot about fire in terms of resiliency and efficiency when it comes to the home. So this doesn't work for everybody, but having redundant heat, especially in the north where we have the woodlots to use, and we can regenerate these woodlots either from a selective harvest or a coppice. Coppice is when we cut down certain elements of a tree, but we don't cut the tree down. So either we take branches, or we create a multi-stem tree and we cut down fuel at the perfect size for kindling. This is my favorite way to use coppice forestry. No more cutting kindling, just having multi-stem trees, maples and hazels and things like that I cut. Alders as well, that you cut at a certain size and they have perfect size kindling. Those are different ways to bring in fire into the home and have redundant fire. So I believe that a fire wood stove and cook stove is probably the most multi-function, multi-factored element you can have in your house. Learning to cook with fire is a delight. If anybody's into food, I am. I had 2 choices. I either could go to the West Coast and learn about natural building, or I could have taken a partial scholarship to Cordon Bleu University and have become a pastry chef. This was going back a few years now. But I still, food flavor motivates me. This is why I grow most of my own food, because I love flavor. Cooking with fire means you have the best possible flavor you can when you come to heat. Not to mention wood heat has a different value to it for the human body. So wood-fired heat just feels better to us. There's some science behind that, but I won't get into it because it'll take too long. But that wood stove can also have a water jacket on it. So we can now heat water through that cook stove. We can dry things around that cook stove. We can warm things around that cook stove. There's so many values to it. So just quick shout out for the cook stoves of the world. And then when we get into outdoor cooking, when we get into things like rocket stoves, and we get into things like rocket stove benches and things where we actually are starting to heat the elements we need, like us, we're actually heating us instead of heating the dead airspace in a home. Now we're actually getting into site-specific home design conversations, which all have great value as well. Lots more I could talk about that, but I think that gives us a little bit to go off of. Thanks for whoever put in the Facing Fire Resiliency link. I appreciate that. Dave, I'd like to give a special shout out to Dow and the wonderful support she's been giving over in the main help discussion board. Awesome. Yeah. Dow and Devin, Marisha and Andrew are just amazing at that level of what they do. So fantastic. Awesome, folks. Well, thanks for all the questions. Any follow-up questions here before we do a quick rundown of the upcoming assignments? Questions, comments, queries? Okay. Well, let's jump into our next assignments, which is our base map. And there we are. Cool. So with the base map, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a map that if you took away the aerial, which a lot of you will use as your base to trace off of, that if you took away that aerial, you would have all the information necessary to interpret the site. This is a great drawn example out of Indonesia. So what does this mean? This means that any of the ground cover has either a area pattern or has a color. So if you provide me a map that has white on it and it's got a boundary of that property, I'm going to ask you what the heck we're looking at. You're going to lose marks and you're going to have to resubmit. So keep that in mind. We're trying to get all the information possible here. We're trying to get the information that's necessary to better understand this site and to have an understanding about what we're seeing here. So first and foremost, what most of you will do is you'll bring in that aerial and you'll trace it. And actually Google Slides works really well for that. The tutorial I put together is a great conversation. And this right here is putting it all together is a tutorial. And if you made a copy a couple of weeks ago of the original template, you may not have this. You may have to come back to the original. This was a review I did of the last course we went through this base map. Generally, for all of you, I'm going to recommend the horizontal title bar. I'm not going to recommend the vertical title bar. It's just going to give you more space and time. Generally, all of you should do should use the map with north being up, unless moving it sideways really does give you more space. If it does, go for it. As we get into this, we're going to need to see a couple of things. We're going to need to see all the structures, their ridge lines, the slope of the roof, if they have gutters, downspouts, doors, and their swing direction. If you want to put in windows, you can. We're going to see utilities coming to and coming from these buildings. If you can't find anything, just make a note. Just say, hey, I'm looking for it, can't find it. Awesome. If you show me your work, if you say, oh, this is missing, I don't have to take away any marks. It's like, okay, they're looking for it. I don't need to worry about this. If you don't, I have to take away marks, and it just makes more work for all of us. So just show your work through this process. We need to see all ground cover. We need to see if we have contour lines. If you put on contour lines, you have to put on the elevational units and their measurements. So 325 feet, 20 meters. If you don't have that information, then you can just put surface runoff. So these little water flow lines and just showing generally where that water goes. Other things we'll want to see is vegetation. We'll want to see trees, so deciduous or coniferous trees. This is the simple version of these. There are more complex elements back here if you want to use them. These are individual symbols that you can grab and move around. These are sheets. So in these sheets, what you'll find, and you'll see it in the tutorial, what you'll do is you'll crop this and you'll crop it to the one you want and then copy and paste that. These are both sheets. I've got a colleague of mine that's currently going to be turning these into individual elements at some point. But you can use just the elements here quite successfully. If you're at the point where you already know the different vegetation on your site, then feel free to start to create a legend of the different trees and their Latin names. So you've got that there. If you don't have it yet, no problems. That's fine. You can just put deciduous and coniferous. Say you have a big forest, say you have a lot of trees and you're not going to put in every single tree. I go into this into the tutorial, but it seems more and more that people aren't watching them. So just want to make sure I give this to you. So say we have a big forest, you just do something like this, right? And you call it a deciduous forest, right? Or say you've got a coniferous forest on the other side, same thing. Coniferous forest. Coniferous forest being evergreen, deciduous forest being annual. They have leaves that drop or needles that drop. What else do people usually miss here? Make sure you put in one scale bar. For some reason, people saw these two, didn't watch the tutorial and are putting in both. One scale bar, and then put in your scale. And then in terms of that scale reference, I go into the tutorial, and here's that scale calculator. Once you have that first one with horizontal title bar, we just need one with horizontal or one with title. We don't need them both. Then I want the entire thing in grayscale. And the reason for that is once you get into things like zones and microclimates, you'll want that map in grayscale because you'll want something to put over top of. So you'll want to turn the entire base map into a grayscale image, which I go into in the tutorials. This is an overlay where we've got the aerial beneath, and then we've got your base map over top. And again, I go into the tutorial how to do that. So basically you'll take this base map and then you'll put that aerial underneath. But that first base map, we don't want that aerial. Question is about the base map.
So just recommended, you think just building in the Google Slides is about the easiest, or are there any other programs you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think this is the easiest. It's the best click and click and drag. You know, unless you have experience working in vectors and layers and you already know things like Adobe Illustrator Design or Affinity, just doesn't make sense to spend all that time. That said, if digital design is frustrating to you, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, just do pen and paper. Just get a transparency piece of paper, get vellum, and just trace and draw, and then take a photograph and bring it in. So many people struggle with the digital design because they're not used to it, and you just don't have to struggle. Just use pen and paper. I build most of my base maps now either in Google Earth Pro and an application on my iPad called Morpholio Trace, only because I like drawing. I still draw to this day and have moved pretty exclusively off of vellum and pencil and moved exclusively on the iPad only because it's digital. And currently I'm now working with that vector-based Morpholio Trace, which I really like. Other people will use Infinity because it's cheap. I think it's like $50 and it's a photo, it's a Adobe knockoff. There's also one online called Photopea that I just recently learned about. I haven't used it at all, but it's free, but it's an online version. Other folks will use full landscape design programs like Vectorworks or Landscape Architect. These are programs you're going to spend upwards of, $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 for your license. And I don't think it's worth it in this course to go into that. Other folks who have had experience with AutoCAD will use AutoCAD, which is fine. I don't have an experience with it. Every once in a while, I'll do a design that needs AutoCAD and I'll send my designs to somebody and they'll trace it out. And just remember, this is not a course in rendering. This is about getting crayon level lines down that are clear, that I can understand, that your readers can understand. If you take photographs of things, do it in full light or scan it. We really want to make sure that you're in a good place. A good colleague of mine years ago, he moved to 11:14 as what he would create all his maps in because he could do it at home, and he bought a 11:14 printer and scanner. I thought it was a great idea. I just didn't want to buy something. And so I work digitally, and then I get things printed at Staples or other printing companies and just outsource that. It's one more thing I don't have to do at home. Other programs, those are kind of the ones that I use and colleagues of mine use. A lot of folks in this industry use Adobe because it's a great suite and you can just build up so much out of it in a short amount of time. So does that answer your question there, Ty?
Yeah, I think pretty well. I've got like working on the architecture side, I've got one called like Rhino, that's used
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot for like 3D modeling. And I've already got like my site and a lot of the surrounding area modeled in 3D. And that's kind of the cool thing on that is I can take it and like actually see it in 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
And then integration with eventually like building actual structures on mine would be really smooth there. Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to commit to that one yet. I haven't started on the base map yet, but yeah, got a decision to make this week.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I remember a colleague of mine years ago used Rhino and did some amazing work. Folks also have used Google SketchUp. With SketchUp, you have to get a program called Layout, so that way um, you can print your legends and your scales and all the rest of that. I just found it cumbersome, and again, I like to draw, so I like the pencil. I like drawing things out. It's super fun to me, and I just won't do it any other way. This is super easy though, and I have to say I've been tempted to actually just start working in Google Slides because it is so easy. And as you're building it, you're already in your portfolio. So if you are working with clients, it's already there. You're ready to go. And that's why I built this, because I wanted something that everyone could use and have something at a professional level right off the bat. And that's why it's done in 11 by 14, so you can print it off and you can bind it or book it. Again, that's SWOT analysis. A couple of folks have kind of had a mistake on the SWOT analysis. This is about taking the lens of the base map and saying, well, what are the strengths I see from the base map now? What's the opportunities from the base map? And what's the conclusion now that I've done the base map? So really do think, after I've gone through the base map, what do I know? What have I learned? What's important? And then I think the client interviews in the same week. And this is pretty straightforward. You're just putting in the information, asking questions of the clients, getting an idea of what's existed and desired. Years ago, I lobbied for a nice to have and must have list. I do it with all my clients. It did not make it into this template, but I do highly recommend it, because eventually the budget and the time is going to come up against somebody's wants and desires, and having a nice to have and a must have is so important for folks to be able to really create a ruthless clarity of vision. Again, everyone's going to forget this, but if you bring in images, you have to show the URL and the access date. So especially in here, this is important. When I was working with urban clients, I would create a Pinterest board or a Houzz, HOUZZ board, and they would populate it with things that they liked. And that gave me information about what I might include into their site. So if you're working for yourself or you're working for somebody else, you may want to do that. And you may actually want to just link it here. I picked that up from a great couple I worked with who really brought in the aesthetic level of design to the conversation. And then there's no SWOT for this. And again, just the Q&A. So that Q&A, again, if you don't have any questions, feel free to delete that. And that's it. Any questions about base map or client interview or anything else that's come up for folks as we've been chatting away?
My design site is quite large, so I'm finding it hard to the detail on the base map. We need to break my base map up into maybe 2 base maps, zoomed out and zoomed in.
Yeah, David, you broke up a little bit there as you were speaking, but it sounds like you've got a big area and you're wondering if you should make 2 base maps. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great question. So yeah, I've had lots of clients and lots of students who the space is too big. And so what we'll do is we'll do a base map of the whole thing. And generally, if it's so large that you can't really show all the detail of houses and things of that nature, then we'll do punch-ins or call-outs. And so we'll bring up that smaller area and design a base map for that. I had somebody who had a very long and narrow, like I think it was like 450 feet by 30 feet. It was this really weird piece of land. And so they had 4 base maps because there's just, you couldn't get enough detail. And so they had section 1, 2, 3, and 4. Other colleagues have had sites that are so large and they've had to make 6 or 7 base maps and just have these little areas. So absolutely. The other thing I would say is that if it feels like it's going to be too much to design the entire site, show us the full base map with general conversations and say, this is what I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on this little area. And this process of the PDC is really about learning the process. It's about learning how to understand, how to work with. And I'd rather you pick a smaller area and do it really, really well than have a large area and have to really struggle to get all the information on every single piece of that property. So I let everyone make that decision for themselves. Once I see base maps and I see they're massive, I usually make that suggestion. But yeah, 2 base maps is fine. If it's too big and you want to just focus on a small area, that's good as well. Great question. Any other questions before we leave? C'est bon? Happy? Joy? All right. Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much. Super fun to have a chat with all of you. As usual, any questions, you can email me direct or you can email me via Canvas. If you have problems technically, you reach out to Canvas and make sure to chat with each other. If I do ask you to resubmit, as a lot of you have figured out, you just resubmit and say, hey, changes are made. I go back through. Generally, everything's done well the second time and continue to have fun. Base maps can be lots of fun. Just treat it lightly, play with it, draw one, draw another one, really play with it. You'll find that the more mileage you put on the pencil or on the cursor, the funner it gets. And I'd recommend everyone at least once, like print out your base map, on 8.5 by 11 or just play with drawing, because as the mentor who taught me about drawing base maps was, it's mileage. And a computer is not a great place to generate ideas. It's a great place to catalog and to document, but it's not really fun to click and poke things around, at least for me. So the pencil for me is where things really, really come alive. So anyways, with that, I wish you folks the best in the week and best with your assignments, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.